Now you had to give it to Garo. It's one of the few series, I think, that can make you feel so damn bad when a talking ring/motorcycle ends up self-destructing for the greater good. This episode of Garo was really enjoyable. In fact, I'd say it's probably one of my favorite episodes of the series. Even though, for the most part, this was just an action and fun episode, it's just that end content that really just ties this episode up to be a really solid episode. Now, let's talk about the biggest moment, obviously, which is Zarba's death. And I thought it was actually extremely well done with how it was built up, because typically with these types of things, I see them coming, and looking back, I probably should have saw this coming, but with the build-up and just how everything was being presented, it wasn't until that moment where Zarba as well as Sophie start literally booking it because they know someone's coming, that it was like, oh man, they're actually gonna go this route. And I thought it was well done just because of the whole idea of just keep moving forward no matter what happens, this is what you have to do, because everyone's coming after you, and of course she's young, she's gonna blame herself for anything bad happening. You can see how worked up she is when Sword goes to take on like 100 vehicles by himself. And I really liked the direction they went. Granted, you could argue, be like, well, if he only would have waited a couple extra minutes, you know, Gina and Sword and Luke would have been there, but he didn't know that. His job was to protect Sophie, and that's what he did. And obviously, his self-destruct was not going to take out the Dark Knight. I mean, we can see Sword's insane strength, and even he hasn't been able to take him out. But I love how they built up to it, and it really did sell the emotional impact, and I love how Sword reacted. Not mad at Sophie, not mad at really anyone minus the Dark Knight. He gets that one last goodbye with his friend and merges the ring with his armor to form an even more powerful version. And I really enjoyed how they just went with that direction and the death for it. And I'm sure not everyone's going to feel the same way. You're going to be like, oh, it's just a talking motorcycle, doesn't matter. But for me, I thought it actually had a lot of emotional impact. But in terms of the actual action in this episode, there's two major factors that made it very enjoyable. The first is obviously the killer OST. There was a very metal and rock soundtrack presented throughout this entire episode, which I absolutely adored. It really got the adrenaline pumping there, and I want to download the soundtrack that was in this episode. It was phenomenal. But there was even some more techno soundtracks and just individual tracks being played near the end of the episode, and I just felt like, you know, a lot of anime, they just kind of like fill the dead air with a random song, but I think Garo's kind of metal and kind of very kind of like rough and aggressive soundtrack is actually what helps the scenes be more than just random scenes and just mindless action. It really gets you involved and makes you feel like the music is amplifying the fight scenes that the animation is doing a brilliant job with, and I really enjoy it. But the second is because of how we get to see pretty much Luke and Sword just at their best. The fact that we can have a character like Sword ride in on his steed and literally deal with, it's the most nonsensical fight ever, but because it's Garo, it kind of makes sense. Like, there is logic to Garo's fights, but there is also there's a lot yet you just have to accept that it's not gonna make sense. And I just love how Sword was just the ultimate badass. He was just jumping around, slicing up these horrors that were vehicles, and it was just amazing to look at. But my favorite action in the entire episode was when Luke came back into the show, and he's grappling off these flying beasts, doing this amazing sniping maneuvers. And this is why I think Luke's always had my favorite fight scenes, is just because of his gunplay. It's not the typical gunplay where you can just kind of sit back and relax and snipe around. No, he's very up close and personal, even when he's using a sniper rifle. But it's just the way it kind of interlinked together and how all the individual fight scenes, it didn't really just feel like, you know, swords hitting swords. And that's something I think Garo does a really good job of, is how it actually blends the different fight styles into one very unique beast. And I love that moment where Sword, Luke, and Gina are all looking up at this monster here. It's what I made the thumbnail off of, and it's just, you get that sense of hope, and then they transition into the death scene. I thought it was actually really well done. But it's interesting how this second arc, or the second half of Garo, has been going, because it's had its low moments, but the high moments have been exceptionally high. Like, the best stuff in the second half outbeat the best stuff in the first half, hands down. Looking back at how they foreshadowed this death, it's really well done, because basically he's talking about how he doesn't know if in El Dorado there'll be a repair mechanic and things like that, and just like keep moving forward and then ultimately building up to that death. I love how it was done, but I never felt like it was too in your face. It wasn't until you saw the Dark Knight where I was like, well, he's not getting out of this alive. And it's just that emotional buildup, because this could have easily just been, I come up here and say this was a fun episode, it had a lot of action that I enjoyed, I love the OST, and that's that, and that would have been fine. That's what I was planning on doing. And then that end content came, and it really sold it as being more than just action. It actually had a lot of substance to it. And when you look back at this episode after seeing the ultimate build up to this death, you see it was foreshadowed pretty damn well. I really enjoy this season of Garo a lot. It's not perfect, but damn, when it's at its high moments, it's at its high. I know a lot of people don't like the 3D that Garo uses when it goes into the transformation and action scenes. I've always really enjoyed it. Sure, it's not the most polished thing out there, but the way they can do the most insane maneuvers, it's only because they're using 3D, and Sword going in and out of all those cars, slicing them up. It looked amazing in my opinion, and I can't wait for the final fight between the Dark Knight and Sword, because Sword is going to want his revenge, and I really enjoyed this episode a lot. But let me know your thoughts. What do you think of the impactful death and all the amazing action? Let me know, and before you leave, smack that like button, share your support. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.